I read Gypsy Rose's book to see if there was any kind of nuggets that would help inform us as to the things that's going on now. And there definitely were some, and we're going to talk about them in today's video. If you've been following me and Roscoe here at the Sofa Squad, then you're going to know that drift is one of my favorite things, and I've got a couple of things to tell you about them today. So first of all, what is drift? Let's go back over the basics with it. So drift is Scentbird's new sister company, and I absolutely love Scentbird as well, so I knew when they introduced this to me, I was going to love it as well. So drift, it creates air products for your car, for your home. I personally use it in the car. I'll take it into the office. I'll have it sitting next to my computer while I'm editing. It's very easy to carry around, and the scent is amazing no matter what fragrance you go with. The scents are made with natural, essential, and fragrance oils, and look, their car products, they only range from like $9 to $15. They're totally affordable. One of the best things besides the actual scent of the product and how good it is that I love about Drift is their subscription service. Let me tell you about this. So the first thing is when they send it to you, they send you this little starter package here. It's this thing right here. I'll show you a close-up of me in my car with it. So they send you the starter package. Then you can get your monthly refills, as they recommend changing it every 30 days. Now, here's the thing. The scent of the month, it features a new limited scent edition. And I have a new one today that we're going to try out here on camera. They're usually inspired by the season, and they're really good at evoking memories, that kind of thing. I absolutely love it. One of my favorite scents that they do, it just reminds me of childhood walks in the woods. So I'm very curious to see what this new one, Peachtree, is today. Now, one of the things that I absolutely loved this last holiday season is I actually sat here and gifted Drift to a few of my friends, and I was talking to one of them the other day, and he was literally like, oh my God, I absolutely love that.
Oh my God, your car smells amazing. What is that?
Oh my God, are you serious? This is like my favorite question to answer. Are you sure you want to know? This is that stuff I was telling you about, Drift.
Oh, it's your new air freshener.
Yeah, I'll give you one because I've got a couple of them. I love them. So this is the new one that they sent me. Oh my God, here, smell it. They send you this little thing right here, and I'll give you one for your car and hook it up. So you come in here, you take this, and you just put it in your little car or whatever your situation is. And then this, like I said, this is the one for this month. I know, isn't it great? And then you just put on your thing, and it literally, that right there will go forever, but they send you one every 30 days. Okay. Yes. And you can switch it up. So that one that you really, really like too, which I think it's this one. It's the old one. You can switch them around however much you want to. Yeah. I didn't know you liked it so much. I'll totally, well, either you go ahead and sign up for it, or it'll be your Christmas present this year. But don't tell anybody. I already told you what your present was. And that's going to be one of my staples around the holiday times. So if you know me, don't be upset when you get one. Just enjoy the gift and keep going. And look, the subscription is flexible. So if you're like, no, whatever, you can pause it, you can stop it. They are super easy to work with. So let's take a whiff of the new scent that I got in the mail this month. So it's called Peachtree. Fresh peach, mandarin, apricot, mahogany wood. And what's cute is they send you these little cards with them that describes the scent. It's so cute. You can pause to read if you want to, but I absolutely love this. So you know what's in it, and then it has these beautiful descriptions with it that usually really match the season that we're in. Okay, so let's open it and see what this one is. You know what it reminds me of? So when I was a kid, we had peach trees in the garden that lined the edge of the garden over here. And they were the best peaches in the world. I mean, like the real deal, right? And it's not like my dad was a peach farmer, but it's just like, imagine like homegrown peach trees. And this tastes or smells like the first bite. That mahogany little after thing, it's like eating peaches on a walk in the woods in fall. Oh my God, I love it. This is why I love Drift. And look, Drift is hooking the Sofa Squad up, and really you can't beat this, y'all. So you can use our code SOFALIVE55. That's going to get you 55% off. Y'all, it makes the first month like $5. Okay, you can't beat it with a stick, literally. So look, go to the QR code on the screen, go to the description box on the thing, or go to drift.co. Use that code SOFALIVE55. Get your 55%, claim your fame, and get your Peachtree delivered to your car today. Hello, Sofa Squad, and welcome back to the sofa. Sofa's back here. Our mascot is not on here, though. He's actually out in the living room on the real sofa. My name's Paul. I'm in front of the pretend sofa, and today we're going to be talking about Gypsy Rose's book. Now, if you are part of the, not really even part of it's nothing to be a part of, but if you watch my book reviews, my cringe binge book reviews and stuff like that, this is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to be reading some highlighted parts and talking about it and using those as discussion points, but I'm not reading the book verbatim, simply because, she's out, she's making money off this, that kind of a thing, right? So there's that. Now, what I will do is, at the beginning of it, I'm going to go over the about the author section, which is at the end of the book, just to give those of you who might not be overly familiar with this case an idea of who Gypsy Rose is. So that being said, before we jump in, if you do want to follow Roscoe and I, he's the invisible mascot, but if you want to follow us outside the YouTubes, well, follow us on the Instagram on the screen. It's right there. Go on, click it. Good God almighty, don't let me ask twice. Okay, now, let's go ahead and talk about that about the author section. And just so you know, I have my Kindle on my phone. That's where I read it. I'm digital, and so that's why I'm going to be looking at my phone. It's not like I'm up in here texting or something like that, okay? I'm actually paying attention. I'm here. I'm present. Now, just as about the author, and of course, it's Gypsy Rose Blanchard, and it says she's an advocate, author, and speaker who, after 8.5 years, was released from prison. Her unbelievable story of abuse has touched millions of people around the world and raised awareness of Munchausen syndrome by proxy. Okay, so let's just leave it there for right there. Gypsy Rose Blanchard is out. We've been following it. She was made famous, by several things, by the case, by what she lived through, but also through the Hulu series, The Act. This kind of put her on mega stardom level. When I say mega stardom, let's say infamy more than that, okay? But she did take part in unaliving her mother. She got the help, enlisted a guy named Nick, her boyfriend at the time, to help her do the deed, basically. But she got early parole. She's out. She's now estranged from her husband. His name's Ryan. She's with a guy named Ken. Now, this was kind of the trajectory that I wanted to do. I was like, is there anything in the book that's going to help tell me why we see what's going on at this time? And I did find some things, as well as some stuff that I didn't know about the case before. So before we even get started, if you want my suggestion about whether you should read this or not, here's my 2 cents. If you are into this case and you're interested in learning more about Gypsy, about her life, about her past, yes. Is it a very deep dive book? No. It's very superficial level, but there are some nuggets in there. And for me, what it gave me is a little bit more context of the mentality, I guess you could say, of, oh, okay, yes, this puts things in perspective. This is why we're seeing maybe this going now, this kind of behavior or whatever. But it's not like it's going to go really super deep and just shock you with this or that. There were a couple, trust me, there was a couple of moments in there. But again, if you're into the case, I read it in a day. No, I'm lying, 2 days, okay? A couple of treadmill visits. It's that easy of a read. It's basically done in transcript style of the prison phone calls that she made with somebody. So a lot of it is that. So what I'm getting at is there's not a lot of text on the pages. So it's actually a very kind of short, fast read. So for that reason, I'm like, oh yeah, you'll rip through it, especially if you're interested in it. It's interesting. It's like reading somebody's private text message conversations. And we love that stuff here. Good God. Okay, so now we've done that. We've covered the bases. What we're going to do now is we're going to go to the beginning of it. And I've highlighted different sections. We're going to review the passages and use those as discussion points for just what's going on with Gypsy and the case in general. So like I said, the name of the book is called Released: Conversations on the Eve of Freedom. It says Gypsy Rose Blanchard and Melissa Moore and Michelle Matriciani. I hope I'm saying the names right. So these are the people who helped write it, all this kind of stuff. Okay, the first thing I want to read is just a couple of passages about who Melissa is, who wrote the book, how it came about, that type of stuff, so we're all on the same page. So you'll see, again, this is just how it looks on my phone where I've highlighted a certain thing here. So it says, advocate, journalist, and producer Melissa Moore set out to investigate for herself the truth behind the story by talking to Gypsy Rose herself. There are 5 years of weekly one-on-one discussions, forging a special friendship, reached through the protective barriers Gypsy had built all her life. Beginning the day Gypsy answered Melissa's request for an interview, continuing to the day that Gypsy was released. Now a grown-up who is married and walking on her own 2 feet, and it goes into their conversations a little bit here. Then we'll go down here a little bit. It says, this unique ebook acts as a time capsule, sampling those conversations to capture the 3 months leading up to the day of Gypsy's release from prison. From the time the news of Gypsy's parole broke on September 29th, 2023, to the eve of her release in December, Gypsy and Melissa worked with writer Michelle Matriciani to explore explore Gypsy's perspective during this pensive period in her life. As she compiles her full memoir, coming in 2024, so another one's coming. This document is Gypsy's first public account of how she managed to release herself from the abuse and lies of her past while laying the foundation for her future truth. So you see here, this is, lays out who's part of it, who's doing what in this. So allegedly she has a full, what it was, an autobiography, or full memoir, I'm sorry, coming in 2024. I would be interested to see what all it says, because again, I feel like a lot of this is talking about, this is where I'm at, this is what I plan to do. Some of it didn't age well, some of it did. And this is where I came from. And again, seeing this perspective of her private thoughts on her mother, on this type thing, because I will say overall, in this book at least, she takes way more accountability than she seems to have in like some of her meetings, because I know a lot of people are like, well, she doesn't call herself the M word and she does this and blah 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 blah, but in the book she does, and we'll get to that. I'm sure I highlighted it. So let's go on to that next passage that I want to discuss. The first part of this book, the introduction, is written in the style of a letter to her mother. We're just going to talk about a couple of passages and we'll talk about it. So it says, "Mother, I am now 28 years old and in prison for my part in your murder. And although I can never justify my crime, nor can any letter or apology give back the life that was taken, I am writing this as if you were physically in front of me to express all that I have held in for my whole life. I am writing this letter having had nearly 5 years to feel the emotions felt when expressing the words written. Every day since your death, I have had nothing but time to reflect on the choices that have led me to where I am today. Moreover, of how your own actions form the circumstances around mine." So she goes into this whole letter, and again, I'm not going to read it verbatim or anything like here, but we're just going to use it to talk about. But you heard the first line where she's like, I'm in here serving for my part in your murder, and here's this and that. So whether you have been to therapist or whatever, read self-help books or whatever the case is, this whole act of like writing a letter to someone or to nobody and just getting your feelings out is so healing. I highly suggest it. So it's interesting to see her start with this. Like, you can tell while incarcerated, she was putting in some work, you know what I'm saying? Some self-work and that type stuff. It's very interesting, the perspective from my end of watching her complex relationship and feelings towards her mother. Because again, if you follow this case, the horrendous things that her mother did to her, as well as Gypsy taking part in unaliving her mother, and it's a good example of two things that are present at once. You have done this thing to get rid of her, but yet you still love her and miss her. That type thing. And she goes into this here of like, look, I'm just laying it all out there. And I would imagine, again, coming from this perspective of, she lives in the prison of her mother, she kills her mother, she then is in prison. Like, that level of things, it's like she's never had a chance to sit here and say, I feel this way, because she certainly couldn't ever do that with her mother. Okay, so let's go ahead and start on that next passage. It's still in the introduction, it's still in that letter format. So it says, "Waiting for the next time your hand was to strike me for simply trying to make a friend. Fear, manipulation, and isolation were all I knew of your kind of love, and the lingering question of why I was unable to be allowed the one thing that everyone else seemed to have, the ability of free will." Now I'm going to jump down to the next thing before we discuss it. And it's just at the bottom here, you can see. It says, "With now having the answers I sought to find, I am finally able to let go of the resentment I held against you and forgive you. And moreover, I want to let you know that I'm so sorry for having a part in your death. Murder was never the answer or solution. There is not a single day that you go unremembered, and I will carry this regret and remorse for the rest of my life." Now she'll go into how much she loves her mother and whatnot, and how much she regrets this. And again, this is like her acting as though she's writing the letter. Now, one thing that hit home for me in this is when, with the way she's telling this, and again, to me, this is like a surface level book, but she really gets into this dynamic of putting you in the place of like seeing how tiny her world was and how the reality that she grew up and lived in was so foreign to anything any of us would know or be familiar with, that she had no clue of certain things. Now, obviously, as she got older, Roscoe's in my hand right now, sorry. As she got older, these things, you would just naturally see things on TV or your neighbors, or just the feelings and things that go on with your body and mind as you get older. And you can't stop the hands of time, but Dee Dee definitely tried to. And so that's the part where you see the train wreck coming, because it's like, unless you just moved out to the mountains somewhere with no form of contact with anybody else, a person's going to know that something's up. And of course, you're going to begin to question things. And of course, Gypsy would do this at one point, but because her mother seemed to be such a master at isolating her away from everything and everybody and using love as a currency and attention, she was able to pull the strings on Gypsy for this. Now we're going to switch the perspectives. We're going to go back to Gypsy writing to us kind of a thing. And this specifically is about Nick and some of her feelings towards that I thought were very interesting. We'll talk about it after I read the passage that I highlighted. She says, and I'm kind of, again, just starting in the middle of this. All people who were either by blood or by choice taken in by my mother's disease and the con act that hurt so many. I hadn't thought of Nick as a victim before taking this class. While he made the conscious choice to kill my mother and do so violently, he did lose his freedom and therefore his life because I was a catalyst. This is what I was talking about where, and I'm kind of going based on comment sections, stuff like that. So again, I'm not some expert at Gypsy Rose case, right? But this narrative of she's not taking accountability or she's not doing this, she's not doing that. And again, I think that's a lifelong thing. But what I'm reading in here is it's no, she's kind of aware, it seems to me, of what, her with the Nick thing, right? She seems to be aware of this. Now, does this mean that, it makes it right, wrong, or indifferent? I mean, no, but at least she seems to be aware that, yeah, you know what I mean? You got this guy to do this. Now, it does sound and again, nobody will ever know this except for Gypsy and Nick. It sounds like he had his own issues going on. Okay. And I understand from what I have gathered with a lot of people saying, he's on the spectrum and she took advantage of that and stuff like that. I mean, I would also argue with that with her, I'm not sure at the point in time that she did this to her mom and all that she, how do I say it? Yes, I think she's manipulative. Yes, I think that by just your nature, you would be by growing up this way with someone like Dee Dee. She doesn't know it kind of a thing. It's like a second nature type thing. She was looking for a way out. Do I think it was in this cold-blooded way that we see in these other cases that we follow of just these stone cold killers and stuff? No, I think it came from a very different place, but the agency used was kind of the same, if that makes sense, but a different, coming from a different place. So she was so isolated and lived in such a bizarre reality. It's almost like you are able to see where it's yes, she doesn't in her world have some other way of going about this, I guess, mixed in with the resentment and whatnot. Now, again, I'm not trying to sit here and say, oh, so therefore let's, whatever. Obviously, murder is never the answer, right? Ever, okay? As sick as Dee Dee was and the horrible things she did, I mean, nobody deserves to be murdered, you know what I mean? Not in the context here. However, I do believe Dee Dee was well on her way. She would have killed Gypsy. In my opinion, right? That's where this was headed. The whole world of theirs was getting smaller, and Gypsy was Dee Dee's world. And Gypsy was ready to fly the coop. And I can assure you, Dee Dee would never let that happen. She was too ingrained in it. Or it would have turned into an Annie Wilkes type thing of we're gonna hobble you. If you know, you know. Let's go to the next passage. Okay, now this is kind of just a couple of pages later, so we're still in the same perspective at the same time. And she says, as I write this now, it's been a few weeks since the news broken In Touch Weekly magazine of my early parole, which came 1.5 years earlier than I expected. My 10-year sentence is now reduced to 8.5, and for the first time, I will be living as a free person in my own home with my husband, Ryan, beginning the morning of December 28, 2023. This life I'm about to lead is light years from where I was when I was arrested and put in county jail. So, and yes, this is very true, right? I mean, again, we've already discussed this. She goes from one prison to the next to now here. Now, one thing we're going to see as we get in here, so you see Ryan, we already know she's separated. Overall, reading this, seeing the train wreck this kind of happen now, right, with Ryan and this and that, you can tell where she's been doing all this work, going to these classes, working, this realization of, oh wait, I don't have this, my mom did that, oh maybe that wasn't the best decision I made, that kind of stuff. But now she's out in the world putting the stuff she's learned into practice, and she's doing like any of us would, right? She's making mistakes, maybe not making mistakes, and wanting to experiment. You can see, and we'll get to some of the parts where I'm like, oh yeah, this was reading this. If I had read this when it first came out before all this drama happened, you would be able to tell this is why we're in the drama that we're in, because this was in inevitable, right? Almost like the whole thing of like, and Ryan calls it out, like, well, what if you're going to want to do A, B, and C? No, I want to be in this committed relationship and this, that, and the other, and blah, 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 blah. Well, guess what? Once you have that, it's like you've never even been free in the world, let alone anything. So to be in a relationship, I mean, how's that going to play out? Also, the dynamic of you don't really know somebody till you know them and date. And even though they went together for a long time, you don't really know somebody. I mean, clearly, but we'll get into that. Let's go to the next passage. Now, she talks about the act. That's what I told you about earlier. And let me just read this because she's basically discussing, her thoughts on it and whatnot. So she says, I had no frame of reference or context for what led the general viewing public to form their opinions. I was not consulted or compensated in any way for the series or other various shows, articles, or podcasts about my life. It's been fairly quiet for a while now. As my release date approaches, so I have gotten a head start on thinking about what I'd like to say and the best way to say it. Now, she'll go on in this and talk about essentially like, okay, here I am, I'm in jail, this show drops, and literally, she's like, people are asking for my autograph, and she's like, I'm on the spotlight, okay? And she's like, it's so weird to me because I'm like, what? I don't even know you. But she's like the celebrity at this point, and it's like, it's so bizarre for her. So the act was just it put her up there. Well, she's like, nobody really even talked to me about this. Like, how could they make this movie or the show based on my life and they haven't even consulted me about it? So to me, that would be weird. And it would also be very frightening to all of a sudden wake up one day and it's like you're getting bombarded with email. The public's calling your friends, family, outside the jail, the prison, the whole 9 yards. Like, that would be very scary. Now, let's read a passage very quickly that talks about like her concept of the world of her freedom. And she writes in it, my world was so small that prison seemed big. That's a pretty small life. I didn't know how complex growing up is and how varied and nuanced life can be at the same time. I had to think about the different themes in my life. Now, she'll go on in there, but again, this is what I'm talking about that you get with this book here, is it's like, I mean, she had a tiny, tiny little world that Dee Dee created for her. Dee Dee was like her god, her creator. She created this whole thing, and Gypsy was an actor and a person just living in Dee Dee's bubble. And again, I just can't imagine, like, think about what it was like. Most of us have an experience when we're growing up where those first things of you're realizing like, oh, wait a minute, my parents are people. Or, oh wait, they fibbed about this or that. Think certain holidays, things of this nature, where, you're first learning like, what? Kind of a thing. To me, this is like such a grand, huge thing. That show with Jim Carrey where he was in the movie and he didn't know it? That's the vibe I got from this, where I was like, yeah, she had zero concept what anything about a real life was like. And so when she started getting a taste of it, it was like, of course you want that, right? You're living with, look at the things Dee Dee did to her. Now, the next thing I highlight is just her talking about the private conversations with Melissa and Michelle, the transcripts, doodles she made from prison she puts in the book, those type things. She's just basically explaining this is how this is laid out. And like I said, so these are the things she's talking about. I don't know if you can see it or not, if it'll do the phone, but these little doodles and stuff like that she puts up there, it might not come through on the phone, but there's that. So let's go ahead on to that next thing. Now, in the next thing, I actually just highlighted this thing about the picture, and she's just basically saying that this was something that she did in one of her classes, and it's a picture of her Habitat for Humanity house in a frame. The frame is cracked. The shards of glass are all the people who were affected by my crime, who found out that the people they loved and cared for were all a facade, and it was me using a hammer to break the picture they had in their minds. On the hammer, I have Nick's name, seeing him as a tool for doing this. Taking accountability, not hiding excuses. This is what I did. Why I did it didn't matter. So, again, some of this could be going through emotions while you're incarcerated to do what you got to do type thing. I get that, right? But let's go on to the next thing. Now, the next title of the chapter is called On Trust and Betrayal. And just to let you know, these are what the things look like here. So that's the title of them. That's the, title up there. And the chapters start off with this thing right here this is a free call from the offender at, and it goes into that. So, it's literally just a transcript here. So that's why I'm like, it's a very fast read if you want to read it. It makes it entertaining and interesting. So the next segment is called Botched Trust. This is several pages in, but it's where I highlighted something. And it's just talking about, obviously, trust and whatnot. And it says you have nothing but an unconditional trust of your parents. Grabbing the hand of her mother to cross a busy intersection, a child does not ever think she might be flung in front of a bus. Trust is necessary for survival, and for most of my childhood, I was told that my mother was the only thing keeping me alive. Stay close to me, she'd say. I know how to protect you. I have your best interest. And this is one of the things that I'm talking about that the book does, is it really lays out, this whole thing of giving us a clear picture of, again, this is her mother who has created this bubble that is so contorted and so messed up and so toxic. How would she know any different growing up? That bubble being burst, and then her, like she said, using this hammer, using Nick as a tool to shatter everyone's image. Because if you remember, if you followed this, when this popped off and they showed her in court the first times, and especially for people who were just on TV watching, like, what, that's some girl who is doing this or that, it's a shocking story. But people who would have known her and the locals who would have been like, what? Because remember, her mother, whatever town they were living in, she was milking this story for all she could, for free stuff, for sympathy, for all these type things. So we're talking mega shocking. Now, the next little passage I highlighted is just a couple of pages further under trust about her mother. She's just saying, basically when she was in county jail for the first year, she had to let it sink in that the one person I did know how to trust and betrayed my trust my whole life. This is why I didn't trust my first public defender. If my own mother could hurt me and not have my back, why would this guy be any different? I didn't believe he was trying to help me, especially when he questioned me about things I just couldn't understand or was hearing for the first time, like that I didn't have leukemia or anemia or any of the illnesses that had defined me and find me. So, again, this is the thing where she thought she had all this stuff, and it literally it's this like shocker to her to be like, what? And of course she's gonna be like, well, no, I don't, I wouldn't. How would you trust anybody, right? Your mother has conditioned you to never trust another soul, to only believe this out or the other, but especially the things about the disease. So that's a part that, and then I sit here and say, okay, well, but she was willing to trust Nick, to come help her do whatever. And then I guess too is the mentality of, I kind of play devil's advocate here on things, is the level of, if you thought you had all these things, like what was the end game, I guess. But also on that same note, you wouldn't really have an end game. You would just want to escape. Because once you realize, like, especially where she's wanting to have boyfriends and she's wanted to live and she's seeing this kind of thing, you're going to want to get out, right? And Dee Dee's suppressing her because Dee Dee, in addition to this, was physically abusive to her. And we're going to talk about some of the stuff, it might come up here, other forms of abuse, if you will, that were like, whoa, what? So Gypsy's need to get away was probably outweighing the, oh, but I have leukemia. Oh, but I have this. Because at this point when she did this, she knows that she can walk around. Her mom's like, look, stay in the chair. You can't let people, that type of thing. Now, again, it sounds like her mother also was able to condition her in the context of, okay, you might be able to walk, but look, it's not good for you. That type thing. So let's go ahead to the next passage. Now the next passage, again, is a couple of pages later, and essentially what she's talking about is she meets up with an inmate, this is in the very beginning, who she thinks she can be friends with and trust and all this type of stuff. She tells all of this information, and the inmate then goes to her attorney and tries to barter out the information for a shorter sentence, and basically rats Gypsy out. And Gypsy's like, I wouldn't tell her anything. What she says, I remember my attorney coming to see me and telling me that the inmate I'd opened up to was trying to trade my secrets, which didn't even have much to do with the crime, for a plea deal. She had used me for her own benefit. I had made myself a target of manipulation again. So this is the thing, because her little internal meter is completely off with like what's real, what's not. She's just a sitting duck, y'all. And so then if you take that concept right there, your internal meter is off, right? You've been conditioned by your mother in this weird way. Think about what that would then be like to be a judge of character, to be like, well, I want to date this person, or I'll say this is a friend, or anything like that. And I think you get some of the answers as to why we're seeing some of this behavior play out the way we're seeing it. Now, the next thing is Melissa's asking her, about her grandparents. Were you close with them? And she says, my mother told me my grandfather had a wandering eye. Her grandmother died in 97 when she was around 6 years old, I think. She says, my mom was pretty devastated soon after her death, like really soon. My grandfather dated a woman named Laura. He married her. According to Laura, my mother put Roundup, a toxic chemical fertilizer, in her food. And what's really interesting is that my mother and Laura and my stepmother, Christy, all were nurses' aides at the same hospital and actually all worked together. Then we go down a little bit here, and Gypsy says, I didn't realize that there were things in my life that weren't normal until I got to prison and worked through it all. Like the baths I used to take with my mother up until right before when she killed her. And then Melissa's like, wait, what? You bathed with your mother as a grown woman? And so then it goes further. They had to hang up and this type thing. And so then later Gypsy says, when I was at real age 19, so this is how Gypsy describes herself, real age 19, because remember, her mother had her thinking she was a completely different age. Her mother had this infantile thing with Gypsy that she tried to keep her that way. And it's super creepy and it's super sad because you can tell where Gypsy's like other people's ages, but mentally she's still like this little kid. Okay, so my mother told me that her father had SA'd her. And I did have a memory from when I was 5 that I knew was odd. My grandfather drew a bath and made my mom and me bathe with him. My mother said that when we lived with grandfather and his wife for a little bit after she had the car accident, waiting for her leg to heal, that he would take her into the other rooms and continue the SA. So remember how this whole thing went down about did the grandfather do this and whatnot. Now, if you've watched and followed the case, there is some interviews with him where he talks, and the way he says it is a little bit suspect. But again, I wasn't there. I don't know these people at all. But that part right there is like, okay, so we're talking about let's go on the assumption it's true. You know, we're talking about a family historical thing of like abuse in some form, right? Again, it just gives you more answers and then also more questions, but let's keep going. Now, this part does come with a trigger warning because we're continuing on that conversation of SA, and this next part is super creepy, so just know that. It's called Pulling Away. She says, when my mother would shave me, she'd call it making me clean. I think that the adult childhood SA she endured and the hints of Munchausen syndrome by proxy my maternal grandmother exhibited resulted in my mother needing her little girl to be clean. Please don't mistake this as me trying to play Freud. I've just examined very deeply how all this might have seemed from my mother's perspective. Now it just goes in here about, you know, her mother's own divorce and whatnot and stuff. So yeah, she would take baths together. She was shaving her. You see what I'm talking about? It's like she had this thing of trying to keep her this young little girl, whether it was making her clean or whatever. It's super creepy. And again, Gypsy was like, I had no idea. Like, this was very normal to her. Like, you just take a bath with mom, right? This is what you do. You know, mom shaves you down there. She had no idea how to use female pads, things of this nature. She had no concept of this stuff. So these are the things where I'm like, okay, that's where you're starting off with going into prison. And then prison is like your first life school. Okay, like that's frightening, okay? Now, still under this whole thing about trust and whatnot, one of the next passages that we'll talk about is the relationship with her real father. And she'll say that her first public defender was like, look, your dad's been sending you all these money, all these letters, all this stuff. And she's like, I didn't believe him. She writes, I thought, who is this guy who's pretending he knows about my parents and my MIA dad? I didn't know that Clay was in touch with my father, who claimed he was blindsided by the news that I was a healthy 23-year-old. And she goes into this, and again, this is one of the things that Dee Dee did, and also people who are like this, where they'll isolate people and create your own reality. So in Gypsy's world, her dad was a deadbeat. He never came around. This, that, and the other. It was all up to Dee Dee. Oh, poor Dee Dee, where these people had been kind of isolated away from her, from them. And if you've dealt with people, not necessarily as sick as Dee Dee, but just that spin these games where they're the controller of information. They're the controller of this. They delve everyone's story out because they're spinning plates, is what I call it. Just spinning plates. You know, they have nothing going on except to manipulate everyone around them to get an end goal. You know, and her end goal, and we'll get some more motivations for it later, so I don't want to bring it up now, and it's not like and this is why she did it, but again, something that's insightful that you're like, huh, this makes sense. That was the whole thing. It did not work in Dee Dee's favor to have Gypsy interact with many people at all, because not only does she then question things, but she can start to realize that, like, wait a minute, maybe I'm really not some sick kid. Now, the next passage is in relation to medical abuse, things of this nature, and Gypsy's responding to Melissa, and she says, it was ironic because I had been to doctors all my life, but never to a gynecologist. My mom never wanted me to see an OBGYN because she was afraid that it would take my virginity. And she felt like because I wasn't sexually active, it wasn't necessary. So upon arriving to prison, they asked if I wanted a pap smear done, and I refused because I was nervous. Now she'll go on to talk about how Christy, her stepmother, eventually was like, girl, you need to get this done. Like, it's just like, this is normal. You know what I mean? You need to make sure you're okay. But that's what I'm talking about, where you're coming out and like, you're this grown adult, but can you imagine waking up one day and somebody being like, no, Paul, you're not 46. You're, 59. God knows, it seems like it goes by that fast. But you know what I'm saying? Like, to just have that realization of, oh, and by the way, you don't have leukemia. Oh, by the way, you don't have this, you don't have that. It's like, what? You know, this is insane, right? I think along the way, because you'd almost have to understand the game at some point, because like she'll talk about shoplifting and stuff and being like, oh, well, we go in and because I was in a wheelchair, I could stuff this under my leg and this and the other. Dee Dee taught her the ways and operated in this way. But again, if it's your mother and you've known this your whole life, you might know it's wrong, but because it's your parent and they're making you do it, it's like, that might be wrong, but this is what we do. This is just our norm. And so that's where this like is conflicting thing of, how much do you know? How much do you not know? How complicit, how non-complicit, that type thing. Now back to the, the little book here, next little paragraph. And this again is just on this trust type stuff. And Gypsy says, I really only care what people who love me and think and believe. She says, I've definitely lied and have broken trust and had to practice breaking out of the habit of deception. There are times I admit things to benefit me or make me out to be better than I am. Knowing this and finding the pattern is what makes it possible to undo bad habits. About 4 or 5 years ago, I was addicted to Suboxone, a medication to treat opioid addiction. I had lied to Christy and asked for $50 because I told her I broke this girl's CD player and needed cash to reimburse the girl. She trusted me and I hurt that trust. Now she'll go in saying how she confessed this and whatnot. And again, if you follow this case, like she's talked openly about this addiction that she had, lying to Christy and the whole 9 yards and then coming clean and whatnot. And like, oh, I admit things and this, that, and the other. I think this is standard. I mean, most people try and make themselves out to be, they're basically put your best foot forward. Because Gypsy grew up with someone like Dee Dee, who, I mean, that's beyond putting your best foot forward. That is like a psychotic, pathological liar, right, Dee Dee? If that's your norm and what you see as your parent, your end all be all, yeah, you're going to have some serious behavioral things that you're going to have to try and unlearn, which will be probably a lifelong lesson for her. Now, here's the thing. I was talking about shoplifting earlier. We're going to read this passage because she talks about this along with the deception and that type thing. So she says, the wheelchair is an obvious example, but my mother also taught me at a very young age how to shoplift. When my mother pressed the wheelchair accessible button at the entrance for our local Walmart, it was as if a stage curtain lifted. Personas entered through the automatic doors. Out in the world, Dee Dee, the caretaker, and Gypsy, the special needs child, were public figures. We were a familiar pair in our small southern community of Springfield, Missouri. You can just see how this went, right? And again, this is the part where she's like, she knew to do this. Now, she'll talk about how her mother, there were signals that her mom would do. Like her mom was in control this whole time, having a hand on her. She knew exactly what to do, what to say, how to act, and all this, right? So, I mean, she brings light to this, and it seems to be takes accountability for it, in the book. Now, let's continue on to the next thing here, and it goes into that little bit that I was telling you about with the shoplifting and stuff. And she writes, we'd steal random stuff at Hobby Lobby, screwing Hobby Lobby for crap that she'd just bring home to hoard. She had a whole extra bedroom full of stuff. Our bedroom had so much piled in it, I needed to carve a pathway for myself from the door to the bed. So yes, secrets and lies was my normal. Each secret and lie represented a huge facet of my life. My Habitat for Humanity house was a scam. And she'll go into all this stuff like that in her life, which is, we know if you followed it, every aspect of like them that was presented was basically fake, right? She didn't have any of this stuff. Like she didn't have any of these illnesses and things like that. And Dee Dee used this to get what she wanted. So the next section we're going to talk about is where she has this first little encounter with, a guy that she likes and that type thing. And now just go ahead and read this little excerpt here. She says, I just saw a way out, it was more poor judgment. He was in his 30s. I thought he could save me. He was the first person I told I could walk, and how my mother kept me trapped. It was a relief to confide in someone, especially because he kind of knew her from all the conventions we went to. Then further down she says, why didn't I tell him? People always would ask her. And then I'm like, look, with him I tried to tell. Well, I did tell, but my mother had an arsenal of ways to keep me attached to her. She'll go into, the whole story that goes along with that. But also keep in mind with this, the part where she writes this, I thought he could save me. That part right there struck me because I was like, I wonder if this is a thing that, not only Gypsy, but obviously lots of people can have this of like this being saved. I wonder if basically what I'm getting at was Ryan that way too. Can he save me from the situation that I'm in? And not necessarily getting me out of prison, but like part of that, of having a place to go to and that type thing, right? It just made me really kind of ponder on those thoughts there. Now, this next little thing is about Nick, the guy that she was boyfriends with, who she enlisted to help her take her mother out. And she talks about, she met him on a Christian dating site, which is I can't with that. And she said, her trust muscle was very weak. And then at the end here, the little thing I highlighted, she says, I find someone, especially on a religious site, to call my boyfriend. And the thing is, I trusted him when I told him how my mom was. And he used that trust to get me to do all the things he made me do in that whole BDSM thing. Now, the next thing here is trusting love. And she says, I've had these 3 significant men in my life, Nick, Ken, and Ryan. I don't count Nick as love, however, at this time. With the vantage point of a pinhole, that's what I thought romantic love was. What it looked like, what it required. She'll go into this next paragraph here, and then we'll talk for a minute about it. about her thought processes on Nick and what happened. And she says, I felt guilty for him being in prison because if he hadn't met me, he wouldn't have done what he did. Responsible. I couldn't get out of my head that he was looking at going to prison for the rest of his life. I didn't even realize I was faced with the same possible fate. It didn't dawn on me that I was as deep in trouble as he was. Now that's the thing. You know, a lot of people, from what I've seen in the comment section and places like that, of course, whatever, you know, are like, oh, she's basically responsible for him being in there. And while, yes, I feel very conflicted on that, because what I feel like happened is it was like two people collided, right? Now, I haven't done like a deep dive on Nick and that type thing or whatever. But, you know, if you listen to Gypsy's story, it's, you know, he was having her do all this kind of like crazy other stuff. Other side of it is there seems to be some issues going on with him. I think it's a very, very bad combo there. Now, of course, a lot of people feel a certain way about the fact that he got life in prison. She got what she got. And, you know, it makes me wonder with the court systems. And again, I haven't done like a deep dive on his particular case or whatever to see like, okay, well, what's going on here? And maybe it is viewed upon like there's a lot more sinister stuff going on there on his part, since, you know, and you can get into the argument too. I was going to say, since he was the one who actually did it, but there's a whole argument of, did she help? You know, kind of a thing. Again, there's so much between those two that only they will ever know and that we will not know. Now remember, she's not even allowed to like contact him or anything like that at this point. But reading in the book where she's talking about like, you know, I felt guilty, I felt this, I felt that. Whether this is true or not, right? I mean, we won't know if she's lying or if she's just, you know, paying lip service, that type thing. Yeah, but she's putting in here this awareness of, wow, you know, he met me and now he's, you know, going to prison for the rest of his life. I definitely think, and as she says, you know, with the hammer, he was a tool. I definitely think that she utilized him, and it would have been anybody, to get as a means out. Like, for whatever reasoning that in her mind, Dee Dee had to go to get out. Now, one reason I do think that took place, and if you watch the act, and if you read what she says here, Dee Dee had her under such lock and key. It didn't matter if she went here, she went there, whatever. Dee Dee was going to always catch up with her and always bring her back in. And I think that that's one part that is going without notice or whatever, is that I can see how Gypsy felt like Dee Dee, there was no escaping her. There's no getting away from her. Now, one thing that I go, like, if you play the flip side of the coin, is, okay, so she's telling these guys, this is how my mom is. You know, this is how my mom is. Well, then why didn't you go tell, like, other people that? I wonder, because the lie was so deep and the lie was so whatever, and her mother, you know, if you followed the Ruby and Jody case that we've been following, how specifically Jody with her clients and stuff like that, she would go around town essentially and make people believe like, okay, this person's this way, so that when they did speak out against her, she had already gotten the palette there for people to not believe them. I felt like that was going on a lot with the scenario too with Dee Dee and Gypsy. So it was almost like this, well, I can't go out here and say this because, and in the past it was like, well, I'm always returned to my abuser and it just gets worse and worse each time I returned. So what do you do? How do you escape that? You know, and her limited view of the world, it's like she probably arrived at, she's got to go. Now, does that mean that's right, wrong, or indifferent? No. For me, reading this book, it's not like I'm trying to find a thing to apologize for Gypsy or to say, oh, okay, there she's justified or anything like that. I'm trying to make some kind of sense of it. You know, because one thing that I found so interesting and peculiar is that the act comes out and everybody, oh God, Gypsy, we love you, we love you. And then she gets out and very quickly it's turned into, oh my God, she's this horrible person, kill her at the stake, you know, kind of a thing. And so it's like, okay, where in between this did this completely disintegrate? Now let's go into the next passage, and this is in relation to Nick contacting her. And she says that Nick sent me a letter in 2019, about 4 years after he got sentenced. I had entered a relationship with a man named Ken, and who had become my fiance for a brief time, which angered Nick. He found out about my engagement and even Ken's full name through the access he had to my depositions. I wish I had saved the letter to share, but basically Nick said that I was committing adultery, that he had taken my V, which he didn't, and by God's law that we were married. This letter was reminiscent of his dominant role that he was obsessed with playing out when we had our internet relationship. Now she goes into how he was controlling this, that, and the other and whatnot. Remember, if you look back at the men in her life, and I'm specifically talking about really just Ken and Nick, and then maybe Ryan. We're going to probably learn more about that as more comes out with like what's going on with that. But she seems to, obviously be experimenting with things and finding these people. The internet was the only thing for her to reach out to. So she had that guy at the conventions, right? Well, that didn't work out. He's in his 30s. It's kind of awkward, whatever. The mother put that to an end. Nick comes along. Okay, so she gets with that, and it's this weird relationship that obviously ends in the murder of her mother. Now, one thing on that note, too, is Gypsy will talk about, and I don't know if it's further in the book or if I highlighted or whatever, but I want to speak to it now because I'm thinking of it. Basically, like, once she was able to, like, do the whole thing of getting on the internet behind her mom's back, she was doing things like putting on a wig and, wearing her little prom dress and getting online and garnering attention and whatnot from guys, and she really liked it. So it was like the internet and that the way she had to like sneak onto it was her only outreach to the world, it seems like. And I'm sure that was very intoxicating. So running into someone like Nick, who was somebody willing to go down that road with her, right? You would have to question their motivation. So obviously he does. He gets with her, and according to her, it's this very like BDSM, this very dominant, very controlling, very kind of like he was having her do some kind of out there stuff. And, she's going along with it or whatever, like relishing in this attention. So then, Ken comes along in prison. She meets him. We'll get to that a little bit more. That goes away. Now we have Ryan who comes along. I don't expect her to really, I don't want to say have healthy relationships because that's not what I mean. In the man department, I would expect there to be some serious, learning curves here, right? Because basically now that she's finally out, and at the current time of this filming, she's back with Ken, allegedly. She's separated from Ryan. It looks like for all intents and reasons she's with Ken. And I would think like, oh yeah, I mean, it might not have ended up being Ken. It's almost like she's reliving things, like going back and being able to touch onto these things. Because if you look at the starting point of really her only relationship is her mother. And then from there, it's people like Nick, right? It's like, okay, that's not good. Then the prison relationships, which Ken is a prison relationship, even though that's who she's with now. I would question how long that's going to last too. When we talk about some of the details of it, it's like, okay, she's reliving that out, getting to be like, almost like the popular girl. Like, oh, I can finally live the popular girl thing. I can get the popular guy in her world. But does he have what it takes to make that into something, if that makes sense? Anyways, I'm going off in a tangent on that. Let's keep going. Now, she goes back into the whole Nick thing, and she's talking here about, I told him he didn't have much outside experience, and I understood that, and I felt a sense of guilt, which is why I testified on his behalf at his trial. I felt that taking accountability for my role was the right thing to do. I didn't do it out of love, but out of a sense of obligation and due diligence to justice. I needed to make sure I was clear on that because I didn't want Nick to misconstrue this for wanting to be with him. So again, the dynamics of like he got out and this, that, and the other, some of it is this way. You can look at the justice system and it's very unfair in many situations where one person gets this, the next person gets that. I can completely see them viewing Gypsy as, I don't want to say a victim in the case, but kind of a victim, right? I mean, it seems like the parole board was like, they mostly spoke on like her mother and what she lived through with her mom, because I mean, at the end of the day, if you take the murder out of this and let's pretend Gypsy just left the scenario, like was like, somebody arrested her mother or whatever, you would view her as a complete victim, right? And so, of the circumstance of the case, because the murder is involved in it, it's like now it's twisted around. Now, also another thing that I think going on with this too, with the public's perception, not only like some of the tone deafness, because it's like you got out of prison, or she got out of prison, and Nick's still in there. She's doing all these like red carpet interviews. They're kind of awkward. She's on social media. It seems like, somebody who's gone viral for something, but it's not, it's like she's gone viral for murder, right? So whether people agree with it or not, it has like a certain thing like, y'all, let's remember what we're here for, And I think that's some of the public perception there. It's just like, it's, take the temperature, basically is what I'm getting at. But enough about that. Let's go to the next section. Now here she's starting to get into some family history and things of this nature, and she's talking about her mother and kind of peeling back the layers as to where maybe her mother got, how did her mother arrive at where her mother arrived at, right? And she writes, my mother might have learned Munchausen by proxy from her own mother, Emma. My grandmother died of a heart attack when I was 6 or 7, and my mom was devastated. My mother used to tell me stories of missing a lot of school because her mother said she was sick and would take her to the doctors. My mother did wind up with severe health issues like diabetes, which required her to take insulin. I don't know if the closeness they had allowed my mother to tell her mother what her dad was doing to her, but my mother did tell me that grandma used to call her own husband a man, W-H-O-R-E. So this is one of the things too where I can almost assure you on some level, like if you look at the issues that Dee Dee has, I'm sure on some level, whatever it is, there is abuse coming down from her parents in some fashion, whether it was some other Munchausen by proxy or whatever. Now, Gypsy will speak here in a little bit about how her mother wanted to be famous and wanted Gypsy to be famous and this and the other. I mean, here's the thing, you gotta understand, they were local celebrities, right? You're talking about they were getting free houses, they're doing Make-A-Wish, they're doing that. Limelights on them. When they're going to a store, all eyes on them. And I can already imagine what Dee Dee was like wheeling Gypsy into a store. And just like earlier where Gypsy said, we walk in and it's like lights, camera, action. It's a whole show that went on, you know, and clearly Dee Dee got off on this. This was like intoxicating to her. So that's probably when I say Dee Dee was on her way to murdering Gypsy through medical abuse and whatnot, or who knows what she would do to her at home. That was so intoxicating and so wrapped up in Dee Dee's life. She could never have Gypsy go away, or Gypsy realize, wait a minute, I'm free, I can walk away. Like, she could never allow that to happen, right? That would be devastating to her. And I think, again, it's just my opinion, I don't know, obviously, that she would go to great lengths to prevent that from happening that could result in murder. Because imagine some of these cases you see where they just keep taking the child and doing things to him to the point where the child dies, because that's like the ultimate attention getter right there, is my child died. That level of attention you're going to garner from that. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about is some of Gypsy's free will that she discovers, and also some of her mother's like casting spells and things of this nature. Now, Gypsy is talking about how she got this like laptop or a tablet or whatever from the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. And she was like going on the internet, sneaking around all this stuff. So she writes, if I was found out, I would be in big trouble. Not just for the laptop use, but for the impure thoughts. Punishments range from physical to emotional to the supernatural. I remember a trip to the store. My mother marched in and handpicked the right cow's tongue. She needed it for a recipe, but not the kind from a Barefoot Contessa cookbook. She was cooking up a spell. And then she goes further down. The spell my mother said she was conjuring with that cow's tongue had two intentions: to cleanse my sinful soul and to cast upon me a lifelong curse. Gypsy shall never find happiness. She will never be free. Now, reading through this, I think that she truly, like, imagine being a kid and your mother doing stuff like that. I think that that is a huge thing to Gypsy, is to find that freedom and happiness, because she was so convinced and so believed her mother that she would never have it. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about Gypsy's education, things of this nature. Gypsy was homeschooled. During this, just, you know, again, this is one reason why a lot of these cases that we follow where you say, oh, the kids are homeschooled, is devastating, right? Because obviously homeschooling can be great. You can control your children's knowledge, this type of thing, but it can also be very devastating in some of these cases, Gypsy's being one of them. Because imagine if she was going to school, of course Dee Dee can never let her, right? If she was going to school, they would have figured out eventually, this, you know, girl, what's a wheelchair for? You know what I'm saying? So this is what Gypsy writes. I only went through first grade when I got to prison. They were like assuming I went all the way through high school, but I didn't know anything except maybe a little addition and subtraction. But I mean, multiplication and division, I was lost. So they put me in an education program where I worked 5 years to get my high school equivalent diploma. So again, of all the things that Dee Dee has robbed her, also of an education, she only had like a first grade education. So this is where I'm like trying to make sense of it. And like, how do we arrive at the only choice was to have Dee Dee killed? You know, and it's little nuggets like this, and I'm like, yeah, this girl had like zero education. All she knew was her mother. All she knew is she got away from her, that she was brought right back. The whole 9 yards, right? Again, such a limited, tiny world that Gypsy lived in. Let's go to the next section. Now, another thing that Gypsy writes about in the book is about, you know, essentially seeing other people, especially her own family members, having normal lives, doing normal stuff. And that's one thing, if you watch that act that was depicted in there, where she's like looking out the window. You know what I mean? And seeing other people live a certain way. And like, well, why can't I have that? Because you would eventually be questioning this, right? So she writes this, and she's speaking of a younger sister. And she says, Mia is the younger sister by 10 years, but so much older than me in every way except biologically. I would see pictures of her going to prom and graduation, a stark reminder of how close I had come to having a normal existence. It's hard to not slip into a dark place looking at her life and mine, me in prison with no teeth or formal education. You know, some of these cases that we study, you know what I'm saying, like watch, review, where there's like, say, 3 children in the house, 2 children in the house, whatever. One of them is severely abused, leading to death or something like that, and another child, everything's normal, like that's fine. It's like this kid was a scapegoat. I'm sitting here listening to Gypsy talking, where it's like, Yeah, can you imagine like looking, sitting there and being like, how close I was to having a normal life. If I could have just gone over here with dad, or gotten away from mom. But of course, you don't know that in the moment. And her mother, again, isolated her from the entire family in many situations and things because, again, you can't have them around. Now let's move on and talk about more of like a religious aspect with Gypsy, because this seems to be an important dynamic of her life and something that she's definitely, I don't want to say exploring, but like, obviously if you've lived through situations like this, you're going to be really kind of questioning a lot of things, right? So here's what she has to say about this. And she talks about never feeling like she could ever get, clean enough. And then she speaks on being baptized. And she says, it was about renewal. I felt clean every time. Every time I felt like a bad person, I'd want to go get baptized. Like little things made me feel bad. If I would tell her, meaning her mother, a lie, kept a secret from her, small things, if I talked back to her, I'd want to get baptized. Growing up with a mom who had schizophrenia, who saw shapes and shadows and heard voices, I felt like my mom had a judgment of me. When she would be listening to the voices in her head, she told me, there are 8 voices in my head and 7 of them don't like you. I thought being as clean as possible would get her to accept me. Now again, in here, seeing a mom with schizophrenia and this and the voices in her head. And one thing that's of interest is how Gypsy talks about her mother. Now obviously this is hindsight, but even now currently reading it, the way she talks is her mother was the sun, the moon, the earth, all that. It was her world. Everything revolved around this mother, right? And that's how Dee Dee wanted it. She didn't want it any different. And so that's one thing that I gleaned from this book was that dynamic where I was like, wow, like everything of Gypsy, however Gypsy's world was up to Dee Dee. She was Gypsy's God in a sense. Now let's go speak on some of the lies and the deception and stuff like that and how she speaks of that. And I'm just going to read this little passage. She says, I was taught to live a life of lies and deception, which made me feel sinful and burdened with a feeling of filth. We'd go to church every week and I'd pray to God to send me a blessing to make all the ickiness go away, but no blessing came. I was mad at God because I'd asked him in church and before bed and in my head. Now she goes over that, and I can imagine if you're in this situation, and again, even if you're not like if you look at it like, okay, I haven't realized that my life is a fraud, but the beginnings of that, and you're going to church or whatever, you're begging for God and no help is coming, no nothing is coming, it's going to make you probably kind of turn your back on that. And maybe we heard testimonials from people like this just in other walks of life, maybe that haven't lived through this but have been through certain circumstances and whatnot. So to hear Gypsy speak of this, and again, her mother controlled so much of what was going on, and I can only imagine when you get into like the rumblings of beginning to realize like something doesn't seem right here. I need to be rescued, but I don't know how. It would be disappointing to never be rescued. Now, like we talked about earlier, you're going to be wanted to probably redefine your religious beliefs, things of this nature. And Gypsy experimented with different belief systems and things of this nature while she was incarcerated, and she speaks of it in here. And she'll talk about, witchcraft and things like that. So let's just read a quick passage about it. She says, so learning about Wicca felt familiar. Its reference toward the elements of nature around us, earth, fire, water, air, appealed to me as a nature lover. The idea that one could control the forces within herself or him or herself, a core principle of Wicca, was familiar to me as well, growing up with a mother who believed in manifesting outcomes through spells. Exploring Wicca was a necessary phase to go through in my quest to form my identity, just like my mother had done when she explored the supernatural in her 20s and then again by church hopping. To me, one thing I took from this also is I was like, it's probably a way for Gypsy to kind of try to figure out her mother. Because again, this is just one phase she went through. She does not practice this anymore, I don't believe. I believe she kind of landed on something else. But a lot of what Gypsy talks about is so much seems like she's trying to figure out her mother, because it's almost like her mother is still this enigma. And I can imagine so, because it's like you went through this whole thing, the murder happens, you get away from it, and then only to learn, wait a minute, this isn't true, that isn't true, this isn't true. Because I can completely see it being a scenario being like, oh, I thought I had leukemia, but I realized that the chair was fake. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think she realized at one time, like, the gravity of how everything Dee Dee was making her do and live and whatnot was not real, right? And so it's almost like when you're reading this, it's like this whole thing where she's peeling back these layers, trying to figure out who was this woman, right? I mean, I know I would, right? I think any of us can say that that's something that we go through with our parents, is trying to figure out, like, well, who were they? You know, because we only knew them as, like, our parents, like as mom or dad or whatever is particular to your life, you know, not their first names, or, you know what I'm saying? So then when you get into a scenario like this, there's so many secrets and so much deception and so much crazy stuff going on. And you're just like, what, how did we arrive here? Now, on faith and trust and stuff like this, Gypsy has this to say. For me, it's the other way around. Trust has to be there before faith happens. If I don't trust you, I'm not going to have faith in you or in the idea that you are safe to have in my life. Having faith in someone else means I know their intentions are pure. They have that love and that care for me and the same balance as I have for them. So she speaks of some examples and things of that nature. You know, and again, these are just things that she's going to have to completely redefine, because in my opinion, it's almost like, yeah, you get plucked out of life and you have to reevaluate things. And then also within yourself, because just like she says, where she's like, I feel guilty about Nick. I feel guilty about my mother. Or, yes, I did do these things. Not only are you redefining these core values of how I present them to the world, but what I expect out of the world toward me. You know what I'm saying? Now, let's get back more into the repercussions of her mother's behavior and that whole story. And she'll talk about, like, you know, the reaction that people have towards her mother, things of that nature. So I'm just going to go ahead and read here. Gypsy says, not everyone has forgiven me for my mom's fraud. There are still people to this day that will not talk to me. They might not hate me, but they don't want any part of my life. There are 20 people who rejected my Facebook friend request. And then Melissa, the interviewer, says, do you blame them? And Gypsy says, no, not at all. They might not wish me harm, but I think maybe that seeing me brings them back to a not happy time for them. It might not be anything personal. The betrayal was so profound. Again, I said this in the beginning, and I'll say it one more time. The shock when we saw her in the courtroom for the first time, and you're like, wait, what? Now, for someone like me, it was being told, this is a story, she could walk, whatever, and here she is like this, and it's shocking. Think of the person at the grocery store that helped them around every week. Think of the person at the movie theater that would let them in for free. Think of the person at the Make-A-Wish Foundation. You see what I'm saying? Like, it goes on and on and on. People who personally interacted. Think of the family members that were either like, I can't believe they swindled us, or I can't believe we didn't do something. It goes all over, right? So for her to be like, yeah, I mean, I get it. People, I'm a reminder. You know what I mean? Like, there's going to be a level of like, what, like, I can't deal with you. You know what I mean? Like, I just can't deal with you. You know, right, wrong, or indifferent, right? I get it. And I'm glad that she acknowledges this. Now, we're going to move on to the section of the title of the chapter is like about becoming a public figure and how this changed everything. Now, remember when I said that when the act came out, like, she blew up over this, okay? This is when the public was like, Gypsy Rose, Gypsy Rose, Gypsy Rose, and everyone started all this crazy stuff. Now, the passage I'm going to read is speaking to her mother. Remember how I also spoke about how her mother was like fame hungry and all that kind of stuff? So we're getting into that conversation here. So imagine, number one, where the act blows up, Gypsy's famous, but she's also coming from a place of that's what her mother wanted and kind of living through that. She's going to already have the precursor, like in my opinion, again, I'm not a shrink, like this precursor for like, I already know what this touch of like local fame is like, and it was shrouded in eh. And so now here we go where the whole like nation, like, you know, tons of people are interested in me. So let's get into this. She says, and again, this is about her mother. The notoriety added a dimension to her disease. Yes, the Munchausen by proxy was the most dangerous part of the abuse, but it also acted as a backstage pass to my mother's internal cinematic show. Whatever that movie in her mind was, I wasn't the star of it. When the press arrived, she'd be doing all of the talking, while I numbly waited for my cue, like a stage mother. Beauty Queen Dee Dee fed me my lines. It's a dream come true. This makes me so happy. My mom is my best friend. Through me and through the script we memorized, Dee Dee could achieve some level of the fame she had long desired. Very interesting. Very, very interesting. Now she goes on to say, I had to remind them that my mother had always, now they're talking about the act. I had to remind them that my mother had always been vying for me to become one celebrity, and I am not thankful at all for how the act ripped me from my private life to a public existence that even my mother couldn't have manifested with her most wicked spell. Now she talks about, you know, basically what this is like, and again, I said in the beginning where people want her autograph, people treated her different in prison, and remember, she's trying to keep her head down and go home, right? So all of a sudden to be like on Front Street, which there are repercussions for with the public calling in and saying things that she's trying to escape and this, that, and the other. I mean, it's bad, right? You don't want that kind of notoriety. I mean, I would think not, right? While you're incarcerated, especially when you're starting to get close to getting out, where you're like, okay, I could like go home. Mind you, I get it. She was only in there for 10 years. Not that I'm trying to be like, that's not that much time. But in comparison to someone like Nick or other people doing huge time, and she is aware of that, right? She's completely aware of it. So let's move on to the next. Now, the thing I'm getting ready to read is her thoughts on, becoming famous and all that, but it's the last sentence that I want you to pay attention to. I'm like, what is going on? It was like a bomb went off, and I went from just Gypsy Rose Blanchard just doing her time in prison to being a celebrity overnight and a celebrity for doing something horrible. So again, remember, like, to me, she's calling out a lot of the stuff that people are calling out, saying that she's not acknowledging. Now, granted, you can write this and then get out and prance around doing your little Instagram stuff and it comes off wrong, right? And so I get that. There's like two things can be true at once, right? But one thing that I took from this is I was like, she does seem to have more of a knowledge of like what she did was shady. You know what I mean? Now, I'm not trying to say, again, oh, give her a free pass, whatever. I'm not getting the just the flippant kind of attitude throughout this, because in her world, it's almost like she's coming at it from almost a victim standpoint. So I thought this was interesting, these little nuggets that she drops about the guilt over Nick and doing something horrible and calling herself a murderer and things of this nature. She continues, she says, I wasn't proud of my crime by any means. Christy said, baby, you survived something that a lot of kids would have died in. People are not proud of your crime. They are proud of that you survived and are making yourself do better in life. Gypsy says, that gave me a sense of balance. Now down here she says, I keep myself grounded by always remembering that I'm here because I committed a crime, not for any other reason. Every time an interview request comes in or someone asks me for an autograph, I say to myself, you're a murderer. No high horse here. That stays at the forefront of my mind. Now I'm sure a lot of people are thinking, well, she sure isn't acting like that. Here's my thing. I think and this is true for many things going on in her life, I think, and again, I ain't no shrink, okay? It's just from the sofa, the Roscoe and sofa, viewpoint. When she's incarcerated, she has all this time to think and analyze and all that. And then again, she gets out. She goes from all that she just did to infamy and celebrity and talk shows and this and that. I cannot fathom what that would have been like, right? So then it's like she's getting caught up with it. You know what I mean? Almost like, well, I've got millions of followers and this and that, and it just it blows up. Going from a tiny sheltered world to the whole world at your fingertips. I mean, what are you going to do with that, right? So while she's sitting here saying like, no high horse here, this stays at the forefront of my mind, I think she's going to always have that in her mind. She's going to have those images. She's going to have those blood-soaked images always etched in her mind. So when we see her prance around doing all this kind of stuff, yeah, it sits wrong, but on the same note, I do think that there's an awareness in there, but it's also like an insecurity, that she's not wanting to really come out about. Another thing too is, she wants to be an advocate. She wants to be this and that. It's almost like she needs to get whatever it is out of her system and then go and do that with the things that she's talking about, that she wants to kind of pay it forward. But again, it's almost like she's never lived, so of course she's human, she's going to want to. And now, speaking of this instant celebrity, let's talk about one of the outcomes of that is people reaching out to her, specifically men. Specifically Ken. Men can. Okay. Let's read this passage and we'll talk about it. Ken wrote me a heartfelt letter after he saw Mommy Dead and Dearest. This is another show on her. I thought he sounded like a cool guy, so I wrote him back. We became pen pals and started talking on the phone. He was easy to talk to and we had so much in common. I couldn't wait for him to visit me. And when he did, after 37 minutes, he gave me a kiss, let me know how he felt. Now, jumping down to when the act aired, we're just skipping over some stuff here. I was transformed into a pseudo-celebrity. My personal life became public, which was really hard on Ken. Clickbait articles appeared mockingly announcing our engagement. Ken was a private person and didn't want the attention or the scrutiny. While I understood and shared in his sentiment, I took it hard when he ended our relationship. Again, remember, he comes into her life, all this takes place, he goes away. Now, I don't know if I highlighted it or not, but at one point, one of the parts of it is he's like, you're going to need to get out and or either one of the, Ryan or Ken says the whole part about, what, aren't you going to want to hook up? Aren't you going to do this? All the things that's kind of like, yeah. And in fact, we'll get to that in a minute because now I remember the part, but you see the Ken thing. Right? Look at what's happening with Ryan. So see how Ryan's all up in it? Now he knew what he was getting into, right? I mean, he wrote her on a dare. I mean, she'll talk about this. While Ken was getting hooked up with her, all the blowing up happened during that time. Ryan already knew about that. So it's almost like you knew what you're getting into. Well, now, I mean, every other tabloid is Ryan this, Ryan that, Gypsy this, Gypsy that. It's like oversaturated, which is just so wild to me, because I'm just like, how have we arrived arrived here. Granted, it's one of these things where for me, I was like, okay, I kind of saw this coming. I didn't see the relationship lasting, for numerous reasons. And again, it's almost like, I feel like if she could have gotten out and been single and then met him or come back later, just like she's doing with Ken, and maybe she'll have her run with Ken and see, and then come back to Ryan. I mean, who knows? And now speaking on that, let's hear what she says about the marriage to Ryan, the responsibility of being married and all that. I think this is very interesting. She says, in October of 2022, about 4 months after Ryan and I had our prison wedding, the weight of the responsibility of being someone's wife hit me hard. Self-doubt smeared my fledgling self-worth, and being Miss Anderson threw a wrench in my still developing identity. What I'm trying to say is I freaked the F out. Poor Ryan. I picked fights with him and maybe on some level was pushing him away. Alone and tired of crying over the latest argument Ryan and I had, I thought I could share my fear and confusion with some trusted friends. Writing, she goes into this thing about this is where she wrote her annulment, and then one of them screenshotted or did something with it and leaked it to the press. And she's talking about this experience of like, almost like you're in your cell and then somebody comes like the CO comes by, oh, so you're getting divorced? What? Yeah, it's in Touch magazine. You're like, huh? How did they know? That would be so surreal, right? To be like, okay, what is the magazine saying in a private letter that I wrote that clearly wasn't private? Now my friends don't. You see what I'm saying? But she could have also been doing that low-key, knowing what would go out to the press. You know what I mean? Like, kind of passive-aggressive thing. But notice the pattern. She does have this whole thing. And I'm not trying to sound like, I'm Mr. Perfect relationship. I don't have any issues. Again, I'm coming from the standpoint of like, look, I got him too, girl. You know what I'm saying? But I'm just trying to answer these questions. It's like, she has so many things going on that it's like, okay, here's Ryan. So she then pushes, oh my God, I'm married. Get away. I don't want this. Let me test you. Let me test you to see if you're really going to stay. And he kept showing up and he kept staying, right? I mean, of course, at this point, they're married, And she does say that he drove there and was like, girl, what's up? And if you watch the docuseries, this came out. Okay. Now, let's move on to the next thing. She says, I know that doing 2 books, a Lifetime docuseries, and a follow-up series will look nothing like the private life I wish I had. People will criticize me. They'll accuse me of being a publicity hound or selling out or who knows what. But blessings like this found me when I am grappling with the optics and falling prey to guilt and shame. Let's go down to one next thing. It jumps over a couple of pages, but kind of same thing here. I'm going to stay steady on the path I'm on and make the exposure count towards a bigger, more serious career. A career in advocacy and awareness and positive change. My nightmares are being replaced with aspirational daydreams of starting my own organization, spreading knowledge and awareness about Munchausen by proxy. Okay, so pause there. So here's the thing. When she gets out and does all this stuff or whatever, now here's my take on it. I'm like, look, girl, you gotta do something for work, so get your money. You know what I mean? The world's want to know all these answers. We'll give them to them. Do your book, do your show, do your thing, get paid. There you go. Now, this whole thing about her wanting Ryan to pay for this, that, and the other, again, I don't know what kind of money she has now, but I would assume she makes decent money from this kind of stuff. I mean, I could be wrong. Maybe that money's already gone. Who knows? So that's, just whatever. That's just a hot take of mine. But if she captures the moment of this fame and uses it, just like she said, to put into a career. Now, granted, at the same time, it's almost like she's having to relive her life and enjoy and experience being a kid, being a teenager, all in this very short amount of time in the free world. So it's almost like, get it out of your system, but always have that goal in mind because then you can make it happen. Don't become just tabloid fodder. You know what I'm saying? Because to me, it appears very much so that she probably has a working relationship with the tabloids. And, she talks about wanting to get her nose done in this book. So this is not a new thing. She's been wanting to do that. Yeah, but they're following her around, documenting every little thing she does at Walmart and dollar store, which I absolutely love that they do that. The fact is like these non-fancy places. But she's going to need to keep on track with that to capture the moment and make something out of it is what I'm getting at. Now, continuing on that note, she says, I don't want to be the victim and the perpetrator any longer. I want to have influence, maybe even go to the Capitol and get some laws in place. Get some things changed for starters. I'd create oversight so doctors can be held accountable and doing harm and being inept. Maybe this is my purpose. By exercising my purpose, I can ensure doctors are more observant of their patients' care. Now, this is exactly what I'm talking about. This would be an amazing thing for her to do because one question that comes up with this case is how in God's name do they make it through so many doctors? Now, I say that, but it's one of those things where it kind of answers your question because Dee Dee was very good at doctor hopping and moving from place to place and using Hurricane Katrina and this, that, and the other. And when somebody, many people who are afflicted with Munchausen by proxy with Dee Dee or whatever, they're able to sit here and be like, oh, this doctor's asking too many questions. We'll go over here. And you already know, doctor, there's so much liability that goes on and stuff like these days. It's like, don't even get me started on that. So with doctors just going along with or not asking questions or this, that, and the other. So, but to me, I'm like, yes, this is absolutely viable. I don't expect her to get out and sit here, and just be on her hands and knees praying all day long, whatever. Yes, live your life, have fun. But again, it's just keep this goal in mind because I think this moment in time will go away, right? The public, people are already losing interest in this, It's just kind of like, okay. I think that's one thing she probably didn't account for, which is good, is number one, okay, yes, this blew up major, but also the internet is very fickle. And what's interesting today is discarded tomorrow and on to the next thing, and it's just like, oh, Gypsy, 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 let's destroy her and I'll move on to the next thing. It's just the way it is. I mean, at least here in the States, I don't know about other places. It is what it is. So let's keep going. Now, another dynamic that Gypsy talks about in here are the issues that come with things like this PTSD, codependency. And the codependency aspect between her and her mother was very interesting because clearly that was something that was going on. Now, let's read this little passage here, then we'll talk about it. It says, I learned that my attachment to my mother was an insecure one, so I made it my mission to please her on the off chance I could turn some of her other personalities in my favor. Remember the things she talked about, the other personalities? My self-worth was dictated by what my mother thought of me, how she reacted to my performances, and the big one, whether or not she'd withhold her love. Love was a dangling carrot that made me jump higher to please her, even if it meant going against what felt right. Now let's move forward. I'm going to jump a few paragraphs. I'd cry, I'm sorry, I'll do better next time. Just love me. She did this thing where she'd ignore me. She'd give attention and love to the cat instead. She'd baby talk to the cat as if having a private conversation and pretend I wasn't sitting right there, like I didn't exist. I was invisible and non-existent to her. If she did acknowledge me, she'd snarl at me and turn back to kissing the cat. That was the worst. On that dynamic again, I'm just imagining what it would be like to, that's your whole world, your mother's your whole world, this tiny little world they live in this free house they got with all the hoarded up stuff. They're playing this whole scam, blah, 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 blah. And the mother is withholding love. Now remember, Gypsy's not allowed to go out and get this from anywhere else or anything like that. She is literally a prisoner of her mother's. And so this becomes a huge thing, right? So I can only fathom like having to unravel that level of codependency, especially when it's mired in things like what, Dee Dee was pulling off, like the scams and all this. I'm just like, my God, that would take forever. And even here she says, when you're groomed to believe you're not worthy of love or even of like, you tend to lose yourself to people pleasing. Narcissists prey on insecure people. So, I mean, this is the thing, is like, that's what Gypsy's whole thing was. It was like, I have to put on this performance because my caretaker, my mother, demands it of me, or she withholds the one thing that I want, that I need, love, attention. Now let's move over to when she starts talking to Nick and the feelings this conjures up. Now she says she's talking about like her little profile she had and all this kind of stuff. She says, I added my love for animals and being outside, even though my time in nature was contained to being in my backyard, marveling at butterflies and slugs. When I was surfing the internet, I was a butterfly. Nick wanted this butterfly to be his girlfriend. And it was the first time I experienced the feeling of pride. Someone wanted me for me. This was tasty bait for the insatiable narcissist. Now she'll speak of Nick and the behaviors that he did, referring to him as a narcissist and things that he would have her do, and that she would go along with it. And she says, I wanted love and attention that had nothing to do with pity. I mean, that's a pretty profound statement. I'll read it again. I wanted love and attention that had nothing to do with pity. So I made the videos he requested and directed. The more he praised me for a good job, I can't say what she would do, but it's pretty graphic. It's, pretty graphic. Like, she would do it. She would do more. She wanted to please him, like she's going back to. So this is one dynamic of seeing this where I'm like, wow, look at the ripple effect of the mother causing this, and then also starving Gypsy out for craving for attention, for love, for all these things, affection, to where she's seeking it from these strange men on the internet, these men like Nick, men like, who knows what else. I mean, you can fathom the type guy that would be into her. Looks very much, even though she was like a teenager or whatever, she looks very much like a kid. I mean, when she was a teenager, you know what I'm saying? Like, when she was of legal age, she looked like a little kid, okay? So it's very like, ugh. But this is where she was broken down to, is like this level of attention. Like, she wanted that. And like she said, I wanted love and attention that had nothing to do with pity. I mean, can you imagine, like, that's the only kind of attention you get is pity. Nobody wants you for you. And so I'm sure the Nick thing was insanely intoxicating. Now let's move on to the conversation back to when she's incarcerated, back to when she's with Ryan. And she's going to speak on the whole dynamic of basically people saying, well, how do you know who you are? And how do you know this? And how do you know that? Which is something that I've said too. And it's interesting to hear what her take is on that. So let's read it and let's talk about it. So she says, a bunch of us were talking about me getting out and starting a life with Ryan. And one of the girls was like, how are you going to do anything? You don't even know who you are. Who are these people who don't know me telling me I don't know me? And I'm like, you want to bet? I get told this nonstop. This has given me a complex because I'm well aware of my self-worth and identity. I'm well aware of my self-worth and identity has mostly formed under the thumb of my mother. Sometimes I question, do I know my core values? Yes. Do I have convictions? Yes. That is part of knowing my identity. Do I know if I like Mexican food? No, because I've never had it. Self-worth is a struggle for me, and hearing people say this about me, about something so personal, sometimes feels like I'm taking steps back, question myself whether I can do it. Now here's the thing, a couple of things in here that I found interesting. Number one, where she'd be like, hey, you want to bet? Nobody likes being told something about themselves. Like, you have to digest that, right? Even if it's right, you have to kind of like sit back and be like, okay, well, maybe they're right, type thing. With Gypsy, I mean, again, that's the whole thing where she says here, do I know if I like Mexican food? I've never had it. And that's the thing. It's like, girl, there's so many things you haven't done yet. And you're signing up to go do these with another human being for the rest of your life before you even get out and have a chance to do this, right? That's where I think the issue lies in regards specifically to her getting married to Ryan. It's stepping right out into this. It's not like, okay, you watch Love After Lockup and it's like, I mean, obviously like some of those don't end or whatever, but those people oftentimes, they've experienced a life before lockup. Gypsy didn't have one. She left her mother's prison and went to prison. She said prison felt more freer than her mother. So that's the whole thing of like, well, I'm going to go out and do blank. And it's like, girl, just get out and go day by day. And I think that's one thing that people wanted to see. And again, it is what it is. She became so infamous and was thrust into the limelight. It's almost like you have to run with it. I guess to me, I take issue too with like all these like crazy interviews, like the D is fire interview. And it's just like, how does the interviewer take themselves seriously? You know what I mean? Like on the subject matter, it's just, but again, she's out promoting all this stuff, her book, this, that, and the other. She's doing her job, basically. But that's the part where it's just, the media's fascination with something and then how quickly the media will turn. Anyways, let's keep going. Okay, now this is the part that we're going to get into where she's talking about the things she would do on the internet for strange men. Now, she does refer to Nick as a predator here, and then she goes into this conversation. She'll talk about it. She says, my insecurity, wait, hold on. There are plenty of other deviants online who immediately sensed my insecurity and exploited me. My mom always made me feel ashamed of my body and that breasts were sinful. To have a part of my body, especially one that functions to feed and sustain life, I considered dirty, confused me, and chipped away at my womanhood. Back when I was 20, the only way I would feel good about myself was by taking my clothes off online for these perverts. I'd wear a wig and I would have my dentures in. I wouldn't be hooked up to machines and I'd hide my feeding tube. Showing off my body, I got compliments and that reinforced my behavior. So, I mean, you see, that's sad, right? It's just like, my God, you were broken out of that. Now, again, she says, I was in my 20s? Yeah, when I was 20. So again, she's 20 years old, number one, looking like a 10-year-old, which is I'm not faulting her, that's her mother's doing. Her mother was doing, her mother controlled everything about her and did the teeth, the hair, everything, right? That's the part that's like so creepy and it's like, wow, your mother broke you down to this level. You know what I mean? Where you're getting attention from this, okay? This is what I'm talking about. So you can imagine when you're in prison and she's getting these letters from people like Ken and Ryan and all these men and stuff like that who, number one, have moved beyond what do you look like, just like an internet, like let me show my body off, to I feel like I know you. I've seen your story. Let me try and connect with you. It has to be completely surreal. Now let's go more into the whole thing about Ryan. She's talking about getting out and that type of stuff and her fears and triggers and whatnot. She says, I already see triggers emerging and affecting my behavior, especially toward Ryan. We talk every day, several times a day on my tablet. Once he told me, you're my heart. And my body felt like it was trapped in a room filling up with water, so I cussed him out. He didn't know my mother had said that to me constantly. Now, again, like that right there. Now, we each all of us have something like that that where somebody might not know. I'm not trying to make it sound like this is something special and be like, well, see, Gypsy, that's why you need to be whatever. Yeah, we all have our own luggage, right? But this right here, where it really does seem like the way she talks in this book and then the behaviors, I think she's going to have or has an issue with getting too close, especially maybe with men or something like that, because it's just like, I mean, that's not like your family. And remember, her family and her world, Dee Dee, I mean, look at how wrong she did it, right? So this trust issues are going to be insane. Yeah, but then the level of triggers that's going to come from surviving someone like Dee Dee and all the things that went with it. I mean, it's just like she talks about, like, I only go to the doctor if it's like necessary, right? Now, I know she has had the surgery and stuff like this, but she's talking about being in prison and like during that time. I mean, would you ever want to go back to the doctor's office for anything? You know what I mean? I'm surprised she had her nose done, to be honest. Now here, let's talk about some of that freedom she experienced in prison. And she writes, when I got to prison, I was freer than I had ever been. It's an irony of all ironies, I know. But here in prison, I have traces of independence in that as I live out my day, nobody is holding my hand. These rules, my mother's rules, no longer apply. Stay quiet. Don't seem overly happy or excited because sick people don't have that kind of energy. When adults talk, don't talk. Don't eat. Nowadays, I don't shut up. I'm very bubbly, she says. And again, that was like really hit home for me where she talks like, hey, I loved prison. It was fun. Can you imagine what she was like in the yard going out there and everybody hates being there? And she's like, let's party. You know what I'm saying? Like, to her, it was like, hey, I mean, like, cool. This is, here we go. That to me shows you how isolated and just Dee Dee had her under her thumb. Now, let's continue our talks with what she's talking about, Ryan. What I want to talk about now is when she's talking about like a day, her typical day, right? And dealing with him and social media and things like that and how that operated. So let's read it and then we'll talk about it. So she says, 5 to 7 p.m. I talk with Ryan, hear about his day, and I tell him about mine. He checks my social media accounts, Facebook, Insta, TikTok, Twitter. Since I don't have access to the internet, I read to him what I'd like to post and he types it verbatim. 8 o'clock. I'm a little antsy about responses on my social media, so I call Ryan back for him to tell me whether anyone liked my post or shared it. But really, I just love talking to Ryan and hearing his voice. Sometimes we'll watch a movie that I have on my tablet. He'll sync up the same movie on his end and we'll watch it over the phone. One thing that really stuck out to me was her talking about Ryan. Imagine, so she's in here, she's completely dependent on people on the outside to help her. He's taking the time, he's showing up, he's doing this, he's helping her with social media. Number 2, she has no idea the concept of like how, so even though he's doing it for her, like she would not know how this is working until she got out. You know what I'm saying? So, and to see how fickle the internet is, which she has learned, you know, because she deleted all of her accounts. So it's like, she's probably learned very quickly firsthand, oh, whoa, this is social media is toxic, right? But the way he's supporting her in this bubble they're living in, there's no outside influences really. She's incarcerated. He knows where she's at. He's at home. They're doing this and that. There's not, we're sitting on the sofa and I'm seeing your nuances while we watch this movie. We're each in our little thing. And I think herein lies the problem with not just Gypsy's situation, but oftentimes a lot of these marriages like life after lockup, that type of thing, where they don't really, you don't know someone until you're around them. Like these long distance relationships where it's like, you've never even met the person, but you're talking about that's my boyfriend, that's my girlfriend. It's like, but what are they like to sit in the car for 3 hours with? You know what I'm saying? Like, people are completely different. And I think that's one of the things that took place is she realized like, oh, and we'll get to it in a second. And she kind of goes into it and you're like, got it. This is what's going on here. So here she talks about freedom and what it means to her and that type thing. She says, so freedom to me is never having to feel like I have to conform myself to the demands of others to feel loved and seen. All of my life, I have had to conform to fit what others wanted me to be. My mother wanted an eternal child. Nick wanted a love slave to control and conquer. And Ken wanted me to be his Barbie. Well, I'm not a child. I'll never be a slave. And I am no blonde Barbie girl. Now, I wanted to put that in there for the, did this age well? Because notice that she got her nose done and now she's blonde and she's with Ken. So this is one thing I'm talking about. I'm not faulting her. It's like, girl, get out there and learn these lessons and do your thing, boo. You know, because she said in another thing, like, I would never be the blonde Barbie girl that he wanted and blah. Well, now she's kind of turned into that and she's with him. Now, I don't know this Ken dude. I don't know what's up. Maybe he is a bad guy. We don't know yet, right? Again, she's going to have to, like any of us, learn mistakes of life. It's almost like you're witnessing an adult have to go over what it's like starting to be age 13 and move through those years. And like the first love and this and that and whatnot. Now, this whole thing of like never never having to conform. I can only imagine that when you come out of a scenario, something like this with Dee Dee, who's holding your hand literally almost 24 hours a day, like, say this, say that, and then your man or whoever is like, well, I don't like this or don't do that, you're going to immediately want to buck that, right? Because, I mean, just think about what you came from. It's like completely triggering. So I can imagine that's going to be a total issue with her moving forward. Let's keep going. Now here they're talking about just how Ryan reached out to her in the whole 9 yards. So let's read and talk. Melissa says, so Ryan just wrote you a letter out of the blue? And Gypsy says, well, not really. It was on a dare. He had seen my documentary on HBO, which coincidentally was the reason Ken had first contacted me in 2019, right after he watched it. But Ryan didn't write me until much later. I see now that God was waiting and timing is everything. Now further down she says, and I get this letter and I just thought this guy seems really cool. I wasn't looking for a boyfriend, but it just felt easy, so I wrote him back. Now this is what, the thing she's talking about is, and if you followed this, then Ryan was saying, him and a friend, it was like during COVID, and they were like, I'm going to write Tiger King, and he was like, I'll write Gypsy Rose, and so it just kind of happens, right? And she's talking about, his southern drawl, and, that voice of his, and, basically the falling in love with him thing. But also notice, like, so Ken reaches out after this documentary, and then Ryan reaches out after this one. I mean, that's what you're dealing with, is this is your only contact, these very isolated people viewing you as this thing and not a person. Okay, now let's talk about this letter that she wrote to Ryan. And we're just going to read a quick little passage of it. Dear Ryan, you came into my life at a time I had hardened my heart. You are so very charming with your sexy southern accent that makes a woman feel special. Growing up in Louisiana, we have a lot in common, partnered with flirtatious laughter and deep conversation. Our attraction bloomed from there. Remember our back and forth dance of desire for 2 years before we finally made our commitment to each other? Now, she goes on in here, and it's kind of like a professing, her love or whatever to him. Now, here's my thing. Again, when you see these situations on like Love After Lockup and Gypsy and all this, they're in such an isolated incident that it's almost like that's all you can do is sit there and express your feelings and this and that. You don't have normal everyday stuff going on. The dishes need to be done. This needs to be done. That needs to be done. So once you get out into that and you have that going on, especially if you're just housing up real quick and playing house, if you follow my last video where I showed that little sneak peek and he's like, they're in the hotel room or something like that, and he just keeps kind of coming on to her and she's like, I need space. It's like that immediately is what you're going to get of, yeah, this is real world. You have to do you know what I mean? Like you have all these pressures. And so I think with them, that's what took place. Now she's talking about like, oh, he's a food hoarder or this, that, and whatever. These are the things that you don't realize until you get there. Like imagine for both their parts, I'm sure she does stuff too that he was like, oh, you know what I mean? It's like you immediately house up with somebody. I can't fathom what that would be like. Even if you're married for a couple of years, like while she's in prison, I don't care how good of a conversation you had. It's like, what are you like at 7 a.m? You know what I'm saying? Like, what are you like? How do you live? It's a totally different story. Now let's talk about some of the stuff she's talking about in here about plans when she gets out, because we've seen some of these take place. And she says, that's definitely on my list. I want to get some work done on my nose and exercise and really focus on healthy eating. It's a big goal of mine. And she talks about how unhealthy the prison food is. So, the nose thing I was like interesting. So she's been talking about this. She wanted to get that fixed. So again, just a little side note there. Let's continue on and let's go back to the Ryan living together, all that, because this for me was the biggest whammy here. She says he makes the most amazing gumbo. So we have a yin-yang thing going. I think it will be an adjustment to not only being married, but to living with a man. I never lived with my dad or grew up living with a brother. It was always me and my mom, girl stuff. So yeah, that will be something. That's all you need to know right here. I'm like, oh, she's never lived with a guy on any level. And then she moves in with Ryan. And I'm not saying like whatever, but it's like, that alone, right? The stuff she's talking about, he snores, he's a heater, he does, honey, this is just what it is. So she's just used to being around girls and not some guy, and then you start bringing into like, oh, he's a food hoarder. Here's the thing, the hoarding thing and having grown through her mother and whatnot. And if everything, again, we're just pretend that we don't know if it's true, right? It's only Gypsy's words. There's two sides to every story, but she's talking about he's a food hoarder. He snapped at her for throwing stuff away in the refrigerator, this, that, and the other. Both sides of it. If it's your house, you pay for this stuff, you want it, whatever, okay? That's you. If you've lived through a food hoarder, a hoarder, and you get out and you see your spouse is hoarding, ketchup and the thing, 10-year-old ketchup, and you get rid of it and they rip your head off, that's going to be an issue. it's going to be an issue, right? Because she already knows. It's like, I've already lived through this once, honey. And again, seeing the things that just the dynamics that we've seen through the press, at least, of the relationship, and just the big whammy. I'm getting out, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. It's brand new. There's going to be so many pressures on this that aren't normally present in a normal relationship. Even if it was a regular incarceration relationship, most people don't have the entire nation watching their every move. And speaking on that, let's read this next passage. She says, but also Ryan will be public now too. He is going to be in the docuseries and is going to go from being, I guess, obscure to recognizable. Ryan sometimes is like, what if you want to go drinking and bar hopping because you never did that before and want to experience hooking up and stuff? And I'm like, that sounds terrible. Why would I ever want to hook up with strangers who don't know me or care about me? And then she goes on and thinks, but this is exactly what's happening. Now, I'm not trying to say she's out there hooking up with strangers, but it's like she's out, she's about, Ken comes rolling back around, all of a sudden they got matching tattoos, this, that, and the other. It's very juvenile, but I expect that out of her. She needs to be a juvenile. You know what I'm saying? Like, to a certain degree, get it out and then keep going. But Ryan was right. He should have probably thought more through this. Now, I know that there's reasons why they had to legally get married to make certain things happen for her release or whatever. So I get that. But I think the expectation needed to be completely different. But that's easier said than done, right? And, was it going to be like, oh, I will marry you and you get out, but we'll just be roommates. You can go hook up with dudes or date. You know what I'm saying? Like, come on, let's be real. That's the part that I saw coming. So for me, two big ingredients of this, where she's never lived with a man. Ryan's already talking about, aren't you going to want to go out there and try this, that, and the other? And she's like, no, I wouldn't want to do that. Well, why would you say that? You know what I mean? Because you don't know. You know what I mean? You don't know what it's like. Of course you're going to want to get out and do stuff. What if you get out and it's, again, which is clearly it happened, you're two totally different people. He's not coming from prison. He's coming from, I go to work and do this. I don't want to be out here doing A, B, and C. I just want to go to Walmart and come home. I get it. Now let's talk about some of her wants and desires to round things out here. She says, I want an adoring, faithful, present husband. I want a successful career as an advocate to make real change and impact and to live with purpose. I want to help others, especially helpless children, even if I never meet them. That's very admirable. I want healthy and happy children of my own and friends who have my back and who turn to me when they need a hug or compassionate ear because they believe that they can rely on me. And I don't think that's a whole bunch to ask, especially seeing what she's been through. Now that wraps up all the segments of the book that I wanted to specifically read from and talk to. So let's just talk about some overall closing thoughts. So again, for me, I would say this. You've heard just a few little highlights of me going through it. These are some of the examples of the nuggets you'll get from the book. It's a very easy read. I highly suggest reading it if you're interested in, I would say, the case, but also her trajectory. Because for me, what I want to see is I would like to see her make these dreams come true of being an advocate, being a spokesperson for this stuff. Do I see it happening? Not presently, because I'm not seeing that. I feel like the TikTok she made talking about that, if you remember, she kind of deleted stuff, but she had this one TikTok or Instagram something talking about I want to do this. I feel like she just needs to let her hair down and be like, I'm just going to be Gypsy for a year. I'm going to mess up. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I'm not trying to be famous. I'm not trying to have followers. I'm going to sell my book and get my bag and get off probation and be done with it. And then let's focus on this over here. If that's what she wants to do, she might be like, you know what? I lived through that. I don't want to be a spokesperson for it. I just want to go work my job and come home. And that's fine too, right? It's like she doesn't have to do anything, obviously, you got to get out there and live and do whatever, but you know what I mean? She doesn't have to be a spokesperson. It would be good. She'd be a good figurehead for it. She lived through it. A lot of people don't, especially when severe case like this. That's the beginning of the book where her, I think, stepmom said people are proud of her for living through something. That's the thing. In the beginning where it was like, wow, look at what she overcame. That speaks to people because most of us can identify with having something in our life, some struggle, something. And whether you're trying to move past it, you're turning over to God, whatever it is for you, you know what I'm saying? When you see someone wow, they made it through that, it's very inspirational. And so I get that. But again, I also get that I'm like, oh yeah, I'd want to have fun. Please. You know what I mean? I want to get out and do, within reason, obviously. I want to do whatever. I wouldn't want to be serious. I wouldn't want to be married. And it's like, okay, well, I get, she thought she did. She got out. She doesn't. There's clearly stuff about Ryan that she was like, I too, and this includes Ken, would be a little apprehensive about these men reaching out to me after they see me on these shows. I mean, it's kind of creepy, right? But again, it's almost like, well, how else are you going to meet people? I mean, when you're in the public eye like that, people are going to reach out to you. You know what I'm saying? So I suggest reading it again if you are interested in the case. So if you're not, then obviously don't read it. But like I said, it's a fast read. You will rip through this like nothing. So anyways, thank you again to Drift for sponsoring this video. Be sure to check out their stuff. It's all in the description below. So yeah, let me know what you think. Let me know what you think about the parts that we read, the parts we didn't read, if you read the book, the whole 9 yards. I'm curious to know. Does it give you any answers? So, and if you have read the book, let me know what you think about it overall. So that means said, thank you if you're still watching. Roscoe says thank you too. He does ask that you drop some sofas in the comment section so we'll have a place to sit and talk about this book, this case, and all the other things we talk about here at the squad. And until we do that, we'll see y'all soon. I just wanted to say thank you again for watching the whole video, and also thank you for being part of the Sofa Squad. Special thanks to all the Patreon members, channel members from both of my channels, everybody who likes, shares, subscribes, comments in the comment sections. It helps the channel out so much. Now don't forget, I do have that other channel, the podcast channel. That's where we go live, we hang out, we talk. We have kind of sort of a schedule, but just be sure and check it out. I'll put it up here on the screen. Also, if you're looking for merch, be sure to check out my Teespring store. I'll put that up here. And then, like I said in the beginning of the video, if you want to follow me and Roscoe on the Instagram, go on, check it out. It's right here on the screen again. But once again, thank you very much. I really appreciate you being part of the Sofa Squad, and I'll see you in the next video.